What separates a life from a rumor? What is the difference between a person and a ghost? A ghost, after all, is not a soul trapped between worlds. A ghost is a story without an ending. It is a question left to hang in the air, unanswered, generation after generation. For 65 years, Philadelphia had a ghost. He was the city's most tragic secret, a child's whispered story that belonged to everyone and to no one. He was known only by the vessel that became his tomb, a title that perfectly captured the void at the center of his mystery. The Boy in the Box. This is not a chronicle of how he died. It is the story of how he was found, not just in the cold earth of a forgotten field, but in the vast, digital wilderness of the 21st century. It is a story of devotion, of a promise whispered across decades from one generation of law enforcement to the next. A testament to a city that refused to let a little boy's memory be erased by the one thing more final than violence: silence. And that long silence began here. Susquehanna Road, Fox Chase, Philadelphia. A place on the edge of things, where the city's grid gave way to patches of untamed woodland. A young man, a college student, had come to check his muskrat traps, a routine task on a mundane afternoon. As he moved through the brittle tangle of undergrowth, his eyes caught on something that did not belong. A piece of discarded geometry in a world of natural chaos. A throwaway object. A bassinet box from a J.C. Penney, a kind of anonymous container that carried the promise of new life into thousands of American homes. He cautiously approached, perhaps expecting discarded trash, or at most, a dead animal. The reality was a wound from which the city's conscience would never fully heal. Inside, laid on his side, was a boy. He was naked, but wrapped in a cheap, patterned flannel blanket. His eyes were open to the world, but saw nothing. He was small for his estimated age of 4 to 6 years, his body a canvas of contradictions. There were signs of what could almost be called care. His hair had been recently, if crudely, shorn. His fingernails were neatly trimmed. But this was the first clue to the chilling dichotomy of his case. For every sign of gentleness, there was a testament to cruelty. The autopsy would later catalog a ledger of old pains, faint, fading bruises covering his small frame. 3 mysterious surgical scars. He was severely malnourished. This child's short life had not been a happy one, and his body was the undeniable proof. The machinery of mid-century law enforcement roared to life. Philadelphia police were confident. A case this heartbreaking, this public, had to be solved quickly. A child doesn't just vanish from the face of the earth. A memory cannot be erased from everyone at once. All they had to do was show his face to the world. Someone would know him. Someone had to know him. 400,000 copies of this flyer were distributed. His face became a fixture on police station walls and post office bulletin boards, an appeal from a world of silence. Every hospital was checked, every orphanage questioned. Reports of missing children from across the country were meticulously compared. It was the largest signal the city could send out, a desperate call cast into the void. And the void answered with nothing. An absolute, impenetrable, and deafening silence. There were theories, of course. Thousands of dead-end leads and false confessions. But no parent, no relative, no friend ever stepped forward. It was a statistical impossibility, a social paradox. A child can vanish, yes, but a memory? The memory of a child from an entire community? It was unthinkable. With the public search a failure, the case became a private mission. It settled deep into the bones of the detectives who had found him. For men like medical examiner Remington Bristow, it became a lifelong obsession. They saw in the boy's anonymity the ultimate victory for his killer. To solve the murder was one thing. To give him back his name, that was an act of restoration. It was an act of justice for his very soul. And so, they laid him to rest beneath a headstone paid for with their own money. An act of civic sorrow for a child who belonged only to them. For decades, it seemed his story would end there, a question carved in granite, destined to fade with the seasons. But they had preserved everything: hair clippings, tooth enamel, fragments of bone. In 1957, these were just tragic souvenirs of a life cut short. But locked within their microscopic architecture was a secret, a biological language that was waiting for a translator. The ghost of Susquehanna Road had been silent for 65 years. But in his very bones, he was about to speak. And he would tell us his name. Join us for part 2 of Voices of Innocent, the Keepers of the Secret. Time is a patient thief. It steals memories, blurs faces, and buries secrets under layers of new tragedies and fresh headlines. For most unsolved cases, time is the ultimate adversary, the force that grinds all hope into dust. But for the boy in the box, time would prove to be an unwilling ally. Because while the world moved on, a few stubborn souls refused to let the boy's memory fade. They became the keepers of his story, the guardians of his ghost. At the heart of this decades-long vigil was medical examiner Remington Bristow. For him, this was not a case file. It was a personal covenant. The boy's face, captured in that haunting post-mortem photograph, became the focal point of a 36-year crusade. Bristow invested thousands of his own dollars, chasing down leads on his own time, his car a rolling archive of the investigation. He was a man possessed, not by a specter of the supernatural, but by a specter of injustice. He understood that a society can be measured by how it cares for its most vulnerable, even after they are gone. And his relentless search led him, time and again, to the same labyrinthine theory. It was a story born of whispers and fragmented accounts, centered on a foster home located less than 2 miles from where the boy's body was found. The account was chilling. A cruel, abusive woman ran the home, a place where children were not nurtured, but broken. The theory held that the boy was the son of the woman's stepdaughter, and that his death was the result of a tragic accident of fall, or a bath gone wrong compounded by a terrified cover-up. Investigators chased this specter of a lid for years. They learned the woman's stepdaughter had 2 children who she'd claimed were sold. They discovered that the home used plaid blankets identical to the one wrapped around the boy. The pieces seemed to fit, but they never locked into place. No official records, no death certificates, no definitive proof could ever be unearthed. The foster home theory remained just that, a compelling, horrifying ghost story that could never be confirmed or fully dismissed. Then another theory emerged, this one bordering on the paranormal. A psychic in Arizona contacted Remington Bristow with a vision in aim, a location. The vision led Bristow to a routine estate sale. And there, amongst the mundane possessions of a recently deceased woman, he found it, a bassinet, identical in make and model to the one sold by J.C. Penney that had become the boy's coffin. The woman's name was M. Investigators uncovered that she was a former dancer who was rumored to have had a secret, illegitimate child. Could this be the boy? Was this a mother hiding her shame in plain sight? Again, the trail was tantalizing. But like the foster home, it was a path of shadows. The identity of M, the life of her supposed child, it all dissolved under official scrutiny. The case remained an agonizing puzzle, with pieces that hinted at a picture, but refused to form a coherent image. Years became decades. The original detectives retired or passed away, handing their obsession down to a new generation. By 1998, the case had a new and powerful ally: science. In a solemn act of forensic necromancy, investigators decided to wake the boy from his slumber. They exhumed his body from the potter's field, driven by a new hope that the nascent field of DNA technology could finally read the secret locked in his bones. But the science was not yet ready. The remains were too degraded, the techniques too primitive. The test failed. Yet, the act itself was not a failure. They reburied him in a donated plot in a proper cemetery under a new headstone that finally declared what they all believed, that he was America as unknown child, but he was not forgotten. It was a symbolic promotion from an anonymous pauper to a child of the city. And then another 21 years passed. 21 years during which forensic science took a quantum leap forward. The techniques that had failed in 1998 now seemed archaic. Armed with technologies the original investigators could never have imagined, law enforcement made the decision to try one last time. In 2019, they approached the boy's grave once more. This time, they knew would be different. This time, they weren't just looking for DNA, they were looking for relatives. They were looking for a family tree. From the tiniest fragment of tooth and bone, preserved for 65 years, they extracted what had always been there, the boy's complete genetic code, a blueprint for a life that had been a mystery. The case of the boy in the box was no longer a cold case file sitting in a dusty archive. It was now a digital file, a string of data ready to be cross-referenced against millions of others. The keepers of the secret had done their job. They had carried the torch through the darkness. Now, it was time for the genetic detectives to begin the final hunt. The biological breadcrumbs were on the screen. The digital hunt had begun. Join us for part 3 of Voices of Innocent, the name in the helix. Every life leaves a mark. A fingerprint on a glass, a footprint in the sand, a memory in a loved one's mind. But there is a more profound signature, one that is inscribed in every cell of our being. It is the story of our ancestors, a biological manuscript passed down through millennia, a double helix containing a library of secrets. For 65 years, the story of the boy in the box was a book with its first page torn out. Investigators had the tragic final chapter, but the introduction, the name, the family, the origin was missing. In 2019, that finally changed. With a viable DNA profile extracted from the boy's remains, the case was handed to a new kind of detective, one who hunts for ghosts not in graveyards, but in the sprawling digital cemetery of genetic databases. This is the science of forensic genetic genealogy. It is a revolutionary tool that works backward in time. Investigators upload the unidentified person's DNA profile to public genealogy websites, where ordinary people have shared their own genetic information to discover their heritage. The goal is not to find a perfect match, but to find a distant relative, a second cousin, a third cousin, once removed. These distant relatives become the first anchor points, the first threads to pull in an impossibly tangled genetic web. For the boy in the box, the first hits were distant, but they were there. It was proof that he was not a boy from nowhere. He had roots, relatives who were walking the earth, entirely unaware that a piece of their own family puzzle was the key to one of America's greatest mysteries. Led by the renowned forensic genealogist Misty Gillis, the team began the monumental task of reverse engineering a family. It is work that is part science, part history, part artistry. A digital seance where the whispers of the past are found in birth certificates, census records, and forgotten wedding announcements. Slowly, meticulously, the team began to map the boy's lineage on his maternal side. They traced his mother's family tree back through generations, a painstaking process that took more than 2 years. They built a sprawling family tree, a universe of names and dates, and began searching for a woman within it who would have been in the Philadelphia area of childbearing age in the early 1950s. Then came the breakthrough. A name, a woman who fit the profile. Science had given them a candidate for the boy's mother. This alone was a historic achievement. But to truly identify him, they needed the other half of the story. They needed to find his father. And it was on the father's side that the boy's bad luck, a constant companion in his short life, held for one final time. His paternal family tree was shorter, more convoluted. The work was arduous, but the team was relentless. They employed the same techniques, building another family map, another network of ancestors. And through that painstaking work, they zeroed in on a potential father, a man from a prominent family in a nearby county. Now came the moment of truth, the scientific climax of a 65-year-old mystery. The genealogists had a theory, a specific man from the paternal tree and a specific woman from the maternal tree. Did their lives ever intersect? Could they have had a child together in the early 1950s? A child who then vanished from all official records? The investigation moved from the digital world back to the real world. They needed definitive proof. Using their theory as a guide, detectives were able to secure a court order to view original, unaltered birth records from that era. And there it was, a birth certificate filed in 1953 for a baby boy. The father's name was the same man they had identified from the paternal tree, and the mother's name was the same woman they had identified from the maternal tree. Science and history had finally converged on a single point in time, a single forgotten document. For 65 years, the story of America's unknown child has haunted this community. Today we are to announce that we are finally able to identify that child. On December 8, 2022, the ghost of Philadelphia was finally laid to rest. The boy in the box, the child without a name, was introduced to the world. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The search for who he was over. But in finding his name, the investigators had unlocked an even more profound mystery. Who was Joseph? What was the story of his life? And now that they knew his name, could they finally hunt for his killer? Join us for the final part of Voices of Innocent, Reclaiming Joseph. A name is more than a word. It is a key. It unlocks the past, connects us to a family, and transforms a symbol of tragedy back into a human being. With the discovery of his name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli was no longer a ghost haunting a city's memory. He was a little boy once more, a boy who had a family, a boy who lived, and a boy who suffered. With the crucial anchors of his birth certificate and genetic genealogy, investigators could finally begin to paint a picture, however faint, of his life. Joseph was born on January 13, 1953. His parents were not married to each other, and the investigation suggests they gave him up for adoption. He was caught between two worlds, the son of a woman from a working-class family, and a man from a more prominent one, a secret born in an era when such things were often hidden away. This confirmed a long-held belief of detectives. The reason no one ever reported him missing was likely because the very people who should have his parents were the ones who orchestrated his disappearance from the public record. They were ghosts in his story as well. They went on to live their own lives, marry other people, have other children. Siblings who grew up completely unaware they had a brother whose face was plastered on posters across the country. And what of the brutal final years of his short life? Who was responsible for the scars, the bruises, the malnourishment? The identification of Joseph's parents allowed investigators to definitively focus their efforts. The puzzle pieces that had haunted detectives for decades, the foster home, the whispers of abuse, could now be re-examined not as theories, but as potential realities in Joseph Zarelli's life. While police have not officially named his killer, and may never be able to press charges as all the main subjects are now long deceased, they have stated they have their suspicions. The narrative that has emerged points to a life of profound abuse and neglect. Joseph was a casualty, a fragile life caught in a web of family secrets and shame. The boy from nowhere was a boy who had simply been thrown away, first by his parents, and then, after his death, into the woods. But in death, he would finally receive the dignity he was denied in life. The city that had known him only as a mystery now embraced him as a son. His new gravestone, purchased by a public outpouring of love, and donations, finally gave him what the investigators had fought for across generations: a permanent, undeniable mark of his existence. He was no longer America's unknown child. He was Joseph Augustus Zarelli, a boy from Philadelphia. The Case of the Boy in the Box is a story of dualities. It is a testament to the worst of human cruelty and the very best of human perseverance. It is a story that began in an era of handwritten notes and ended with a solution written in the language of genetic code. It is a reminder that the dead can speak, if only we are patient enough to learn their language. The identity of his killer may forever remain a legal uncertainty, a secret buried with the guilty. But the larger victory has been won. Joseph's name was stolen from him, and for 65 years, that theft was absolute. But it was not permanent. The keepers of the secret, the scientists in the lab, the city that never gave up, they all refused to let his story end as a question. They gave him back his first gift. They gave him back his name. His voice, once silent, will now echo forever. There are more stories that need to be told. Subscribe and help us tell them.